Welcome to the Table Leadership Podcast, where everyone is invited to pull up a seat, and all leaders have a voice to contribute to the conversation. We're glad you could join us today. And now, your host, Cyon Edgerton.
Freezing is not even the right word, because freezing is like 32 degrees Fahrenheit and it's like 4 degrees.
Is it really already?
Yep.
Oh
Yep.
my goodness. Yeah,
So you
I
guys, what
couldn't.
do you need to do to stay warm?
Yeah, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't. Like all the power in the world to you people that put up with the polar vortex and all that craziness.
You know, it makes us more hardy and perseverant.
Right?
So
Exactly.
you know, it impacts your leadership, because it's like, well, nothing can get as bad as your eyeballs freezing open.
I like the perspective. At least you've got good perspective on it. So for everybody listening that doesn't know you yet, just introduce yourself real quick. Tell us, who you are and what you do. And obviously now we know where you're from.
Yep.
But yeah, anything that you think might be relevant.
Yeah. I'm kind of a maverick. I don't like getting boxed in too much. So it sounds a little bit like I do like a laundry list of things, but think more of like, I just don't like having to only do one thing. So that's why. So my primary role is as a lead pastor of a church called Mill City Church here in Minneapolis, which is a nickname for Minneapolis is the Mill City. And so we named our church after Minneapolis. As a part of the church, the plant launch team as a planting pastor in 2008. So we're coming in on our 11th year, ending our 11th year here, which is nuts. I was obviously 12 years old when we started. So, and I also teach at Bethel Seminary here in St. Paul. So Minneapolis and St. Paul are often called the Twin Cities because they're next to each other, but they're really not the same, but they're very close to each other. So my office in Minneapolis is only about 15 or 10 minutes from my office in St. Paul, where I teach at the seminary, which is, pastor school, training pastors. I primarily teach biblical communication and preaching at Bethel, but I'm involved there in other ways too. And then I am an author, which we'll talk a little bit today.
Yes.
That's my newest kind of title, is author or writer. Like this, I was typing something on a plane and a woman was like, "Are you a writer?" And I was like, "I am." It's like a new thing. But I've always written a lot, but not in a way that felt kind of like my primary, like an actual thing now. So it is. And I also do some leadership coaching and podcasting. So I'm co-owner of Lead Stories Media, which is a leadership resource company that my friend Joe Saxton and I own. And we resource people primarily through podcasts, which we have a few different ones, including the Stay Curious podcast after my book, but also the Lead Stories podcast. And then we've got a lot of resources and things for people there on our website, where we have just, resourcing leaders. And I'm also a wife of a really strange human being named JD and our little 3-legged dog, Chaco.
3-legged?
He's only got 3 legs. Yes. He broke one beyond repair. And they said dogs only need 3. And not just like one person said that, like every vet said that. They were like, they only need 3. Anyway, my husband's a filmmaker, and so he thinks it's really ironic and hilarious that he's got a dog that's a tripod.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. So with all of these roles, and I know I can't ask you like which one is your favorite, because that's like asking a parent which child is your favorite, and they'll tell you I love them all equally, but it's not true. Every parent has a favorite, but we won't get into that.
What do they? I don't have kids, so I'm not totally sure.
with all of the roles, I will just say overall, what is it that, because you've obviously created a life that really works for you, works for your personality, works for your gifting. And so overall, with all of these different roles, what is it that is the most fulfilling for you in the work that you do?
Yeah, being a local church pastor is my ride or die. Like I hope that I get to do that. God got to lead however God wants to lead, but I hope that I'm leading in a local church setting, indefinitely. And it just, to me, being a pastor in this space is what fuels all the other spaces that I get to be a pastor. I think of myself as a professor for my students, but I'm also a pastor. And so the stuff that comes up, and but the people who I get to serve here in my part of the city and their lives and their stories and their leadership development is like paramount, And so I know that God can shift that, but to me, it just feels like for the last 11 years, it's just always been like the trunk of the tree is these people, and the other kind of branches that have come off of that have been really fun. But it's also been really cool to see how, my book and the resources that I produce as a leadership development coach and stuff, the ways that I'm able to use those for my community is really awesome too. So they've definitely benefited from that. And they've also benefited from not having all of my apostolic energy coming at them.
Yeah, just spread it out, diffuse it a little bit.
They're like, you know what? You go run some of that off and come back like a kid, like you send like a kid in the other room to just run circles around like a table or something. It's like that's the apostolic space that I need to be in, so that when I come back, I can be like, okay, so I'm listening and reflecting back what you're saying and thinking about you thoughtfully and how I can preach this sermon. And but I love preaching. I preach the primary communicator at my church too, and but I see that as loving them and equipping them primarily, and just what a gift it is to do that. I'm super grateful.
Yeah. And I think something that you just said, and I know we have other conversations to get into, but what you just said I think was really critical, just the self-awareness that you have. You mentioned being apostolic, which part of the fivefold gifting, obviously, in, worldly layman terms, kind of the equivalent of like an entrepreneur. It's someone who is a starter, lots of ideas, things like that. And I think what you said, the self-awareness piece is so critical that we do with our gifting, it carries this particular type of energy. And so for the entrepreneur, for the apostle who has that type of energy, it's actually beneficial, you would say, to have a couple different projects going, because we do need to burn some of that energy so that it's not all focused and directed perhaps on one particular team or person, because that can be really overwhelming. Can you talk just a little bit about that? Because I'm thinking what you just said, for someone who's just newly discovering their apostolic or entrepreneurial gifting, I think that could be really critical, that piece of self-awareness, and how is that received by your team, and why is it kind of good and healthy to maybe have your hands in a couple different cookie jars?
Yeah, I think it's something to handle with care, like no question, because anybody who is entrepreneurial or apostolic, I think we know what our pitfalls are, like starting things you don't finish, making promises you can't deliver on, getting spread too thin, burnout, etc. But yes, for me, the growth in the self-awareness is, I'll try to think of it like in a specific example. So my community is trying to figure out how to support the local school that we worship in. And if you've ever worked with the school district, they're just terribly slow. And I guarantee you are not as slow as the Minneapolis public schools. Like, it's just insane. No, probably not in other big cities, but a lot of big cities actually split their district up more. And in Minneapolis, like all the schools in Minneapolis proper are under one big district, and it's just a lot. So like, it is like molasses to make things happen. And so in my local community, I can like get my community excited about how we might support the school. So for instance, we were like, hey, what if we installed a sound system for these kids? Because we heard that during their school assemblies, they were just having somebody yell because they don't have a speaker or microphone, and we have to bring all portable stuff. Like, well, what if we installed some permanent stuff, and then we could use it, but then we just leave it for them all week long. Well, that first came up 2 years ago. And then about 9 months ago, I said to my community, I said, well, we got a bid for how much it's going to cost, like $30,000, because it's not a small room. And so we raised that money pretty fast, like 2 months. We paid for the thing. We sent it to Minneapolis Public Schools 9 months ago. And now here we are. And I think they're going to install it in January 2020, maybe. And, like that's fine. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's not too late to do something permanent. But if that was the rate of change that I had experienced in my almost every day, I just don't think I would just get so impatient, and it would be really hard. And while I'm definitely an advocate for growing in my patience, like, don't get me wrong, I think that God made me with that energy to put in other places. And so I've been able to be like, you know what, people, listen, this is how we're working with other communities. We love the public schools. And so they've got some other bigger fish to fry than like a little sound system in an elementary school. So I think like we can be patient. But that's only because since in the last 2 years while that happened, like I got to launch, a book, 2 podcasts, and, had multiple coaching groups and helped with some different events, and got the chance to speak at things around the country, and and you can fill in the amount of things I've had to wait like molasses for in the church over the last few years. And that's just, I think it's good. It's good. You don't do some of those things quickly. And so how can I get to do some things that are designed to go quickly while I can be patient in the other space? It really helps. It really helps me. And it allows me to be in a space where certainly not all my leaders are apostolically gifted. Thank goodness. They represent the whole fivefold. And so to be able to be patient with the shepherds, for instance, that is hard for me. And so I sit down and listen to them and talk through stuff, and we can't jump to things, and I just want to be like, what? But they teach me a ton, and it's really healthy for me to stick in it with them. So that's like an example of what difference is and how I get to keep things more fast paced on one side, and the other side I have more patience for the slow work.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said, and somebody's really going to benefit from it. So thanks for letting me go into left field, which tends to happen a lot because ADD. So, whatever.
I like left.
Left field's a good place to be. So what I really wanted to start with, now that we're kind of officially starting after the preview of rabbit trails that I'm off on, the first question that I want to ask, that I ask everybody, is because it's the table leadership, right? And so if we were not virtual right now, if we were actually gathering a group of leaders around a table and we were just doing investment in discipleship and leadership development, pouring into them, what would you be feeding us? What is like the one, either your favorite meal or something that you make better than anybody else? What would literally be on the table when we were gathered together? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't cook. So I would bring like Chipotle.
Awesome.
So yeah, I or maybe like a charcuterie board or something where I can just purchase it all from Trader Joe's and like open the packages and put it on some wood. Like I think the best leaders don't only have a to-do list, but also have a to-don't list, and cooking in all of its forms is on my to-don't list. I don't like it. I don't think it's necessary. People are like, how is it not necessary? I'd be like, you'd be surprised how often, even without like things like Chipotle, you can figure out how to eat things that don't have to actually be cooked. I mean, I'm not above microwaving, but I'm just saying, or warming something up. But fortunately, my husband cooks, but I've only known him for a couple of years. So it's been, I would be like, hey, people, like, you know what? Fill this form out online and we'll get you exactly what you want from Chipotle. I feel like Chipotle is a love language. And, I know you like tacos, so.
I do. Mm-hmm. Taco Tuesday is a thing. But then, see, you just spoke my other love language, charcuterie boards. Joe knows my affinity for charcuterie. A whole just tray of meat and cheese will make me happy for days. So
my husband and I are going to go to a charcuterie board creation like class tomorrow.
That's a thing?
Yeah, I guess. Like he found that because he knew I would like that. Because I would not want to go to a cooking class, obviously.
Right. So they just kind of teach you how to like.
If I got a cooking class, that would be me picking out a date for him, but for him picking out a charcuterie board plate. Yeah, this restaurant down the street from our house, newer restaurant, and they have what they call the abundance board, and it's like one of their most popular, items that people buy to eat. So they're like doing an abundance board training, and we get to eat ththings the whole time.
Right. So, and figure out like how to pair things, how to put things together.
Yep.
Okay. I feel like this is going to be a sermon illustration just waiting to happen.
Yeah, totally. And you're going to want to come to Minneapolis I'll take you there anytime you come.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, down in the summer, preferably. Yeah. Not during any given polar vortex. Yeah. Not the winter. That would be great. So, okay, now not talking food, obviously, but talking leadership. What is it that you feel like, and obviously for everybody, there's a lot of different things. So pick, kind of one, but what is it that you bring to the leadership table?
I think the thing I bring the most is being action-oriented. So like being a practical theologian. I feel very, very grateful for the people who are thought leaders who do the deep, deep work and the deep dives to give us brilliant theology, to give us brilliant leadership theory, to give us brilliant I'm really into psychology and like how that intersects with our faith, spiritual formation theories, all that kind of stuff. I love that. I'm so grateful these people exist, but it's pretty difficult for me to take in any information that I cannot see how it could be applied. And so when I come to a table, I'm able to, the theme so far, be patient and listen to the many ideas. And I think of it as like, I love being with idea people because I think of it as they're throwing these ideas up in the air, metaphorically speaking. And a lot of idea people, they're not at all thinking they want to do all of them, of course. And so I'm like, great, let's throw them out there. And then I like, metaphorically, I'm like looking at all of them, and then I'll grab one of them out of the sky and pull it down on the table and be like, all right, let's do this one. And then, ideas can continue on, but at least the ideas get funneled towards like a specific action. So yesterday I was working with one of the other pastors in my church planting network, and he was like, our newest church plant pastor. And he was like, I know I've got a lot going on with the church plant, but I just can't shake this idea of doing something for entrepreneurs, because here we are planting churches, but we've got all these entrepreneurs around us who have joined our church or interested in churches that are starting because they like startups. And so we had this conversation, and then I said, okay, cool. Like, we'll just do this. We'll just pick a Saturday and we'll just do like a gathering at the brewery across the street, and we'll just call it like Theology of Startups and start inviting people. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, no, I'm serious. Like, let's just do that, because how else are we going to try something? Like, just do it. So we'll just get some people together, and the content will be easy. The hardest part will be figuring out what not to talk about and whose stories not to tell. And we'll just get a bunch of entrepreneurs and a bunch of church planters in a room and say, like, God cares about this, and let's talk about it. And that's it. Like, see what happens. And all we need to do is find a spot and someone who can help us, welcome people, and then put it up on the internet and invite people. Like, everyone's like, oh no, there's so much things. It's like, no, we're not launching a business. We're just getting people together. And so I'm always like, put it down on paper, pick a time in the calendar. And I said to him, if we get close to it and we haven't done any of that, then we didn't do it. But if we don't pick something like that and just put a stake in the ground, then we'll sit here 6 or 8, 10 months from now with the same questions we have now. And I think if we did something like that, a lot of those questions would be answered. And the answer might be, don't do this anymore. You don't have time for this, or this wasn't interesting, or nobody has time for this. You know what I mean? Or it could be, wow, people are really interested in this, and now they made a whole bunch more relationships, and now we're going to try X, Y, or Z. So that's the kind of thing, like, I'll play it. Like I love hearing the ideas, and I love thinking about multiple strategies. But at the end of the day, if we don't leave with an action plan of at least the next step, I'm not so into strategic plans where we know the next 10 steps, but I'm like, let's just do the next one and see what happens. And sometimes a strategic long-term plan emerges, but I appreciate the leadership agility of being able to respond to things that when you don't have a long-term plan, so that you can listen to God's invitations along the way.
So there's two groups of people in that then that I want to ask you to speak to, right? The group of people that are wired like you, who hear what you're saying and are like, yes, oh my gosh, that's me. Let's just do things. Let's move on it. Let's put that stake in the ground. Let's explore. Let's experiment. And if it works, we'll keep going. And if not, whatever, no harm, no foul. But obviously that also has to come with a lot of wisdom, a lot of discernment, a lot of hearing from the Lord. There's probably a lot of stakes in the ground that probably shouldn't have been put there, or that didn't end up going well. So for people who are wired like you, who have that energy, who are kind of just now starting out in that journey of discovering that and wanting to start putting some stakes in the ground, what is the wisdom or encouragement that you would give to them specifically, knowing that they are people wired like you?
I would say you really, well, I think that people like us, specifically in the church, feel misunderstood because it's not as commonly celebrated. As when we talk about fivefold, the pastors and the teachers have been very celebrated in the local church, and the prophets have been, evangelists and apostles have been more celebrated in the parachurch. And but still the value is to the shepherds and the teachers. And so I think it's easy to feel misunderstood and like people don't get it and they're just in our way type thing. But I would just really encourage people, like, if you have the goal to understand first, to seek to understand before being understood, that's actually going to lead to the most likely chance that you're actually going to be understood. Like, if you try to and you might not be understood when you try to start with understanding somebody else, but chances are if you're trying to force them to understand you, it always starts, it's a better order of operations to say, okay, what can I understand about these shepherds and these teachers and what they value and what they care about? And also, like what I just said, like, can I come to a spot where I genuinely think that if somebody wasn't spending most of their time in a room reading and thinking and writing, we would not be able to do the best ideas and the best things, or we wouldn't do them well or responsibly or have the best thinking around it. And I've had to wrestle through that and just be someone who's like, wait a second, if I don't believe in my mind that different gifts are better than any others. But then why would I ever behave like that? And then how can I be shocked when someone behaves that way towards me and say, well, what really matters is that we care for people well and shepherd them. If I'm like, no, what really matters is that we are innovative. No, that's not real. Being innovative is not more important than caring for people, and caring for people is not more important than innovation, because caring for people well means we keep moving the way that God's inviting us to, and vice versa. We make sure we do that in a rate that's helpful and loving. That's it. You need it. So I would just encourage people like me to start with like what can I understand about these other people? Because that's actually going to be more strategically advantageous, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So then the other group, and I know there's not, just two different types of people, but if we're generalizing a little bit, what wisdom and encouragement would you give to the ones who are usually wired more like me? Because I hear what you're saying, and I'm like, yes, I want to be like that because I'm wired apostolically, but I'm also an Enneagram 1, which means I'm a perfectionist, and I'm wired strategically. And it's sometimes really hard for me, and I have lots of ideas and things that I feel like I want to do, but you talk about, let's just put a date on the calendar, put a stake in the ground, and I immediately internally feel the anxiety from that, right? Because I'm like, wait, no, but we don't have it all figured out, and there's so many unanswered questions, and we've got to have a strategy, and we need to know what our next steps are, because why would you take one step without knowing what the next one is? Because then what if the next step is like jumping off a cliff and you haven't packed a parachute and you're not ready to jump off a cliff, and my mind just goes like, ah! And so, and this has been a place where I have had to grow as a leader when I was leading a church. The senior pastor, who was super apostolic, I would come to him and I would have this laundry list of questions and concerns, and we need to have all these things figured out. And he did a good job of walking me through the process of being able to step without necessarily knowing the next step, and to be able to jump and put some stakes in the ground. But that can be really difficult for someone who freaks out about that, who feels like, no, we need to know we're doing things right. We need to have the strategy in place. And on one hand, that can be good sometimes, right? We need that balance, because oftentimes there's some wisdom that comes with strategy and thinking things through. But failure to start is a lot of times what I will find myself, being held back by. So for people on that end of the spectrum, what wisdom and encouragement can you offer?
Yeah, I think of a few things. So there's the question around what the risk tolerance is when you're like doing your retirement funds. They like do a study on like what your risk tolerance is, and based on that, they will put your investments in like groups that are maybe a little bit more volatile, but could have more long-term and or like results, And so I think of people as like having a risk tolerance towards experimenting and what that looks like. And I think that the thing that like your senior pastor previously needs to think about is when he's doing stuff like that for his church, that's gonna mean something for like the staff and the administrative people and the whatever, And so when I think about like an experiment in my church, I think about it differently than the one I just described that I would do with my friend. Because in my mind, I'm not doing that. Mill City Church is not doing that. Like me and my friend are going to do that. And we'll ask some people if they're willing to be on that team to help us. Mm-hmm. We'll need some team, but we won't need to impose that upon a previously existing team. To me, that is a very different thing to do, because on a previously existing team, we've got people who are, like they're like, well, you don't understand that if you do this, this, and this, like you're saying it's an experiment. I'm seeing it as like something that just took my workload up, and you don't even understand that, like those kinds of things. That's the kind of stuff people need to pay attention to. However, I also would say to those folks, and some people listening to this might be like, oh my gosh, I'm on a team like that and my boss doesn't get that. But I would also say to those people, if you think this person is worth following and, leading the vision and charge of what you're doing, you wouldn't be on a team, because that team may or may not exist if it wasn't for people like me. Like it probably wouldn't. Like there is no such thing as having answers to questions before you do something. We can make up some stuff to make people like you not feel so anxious. And, I do that sometimes, but I can also say very true things like, hey, you know what? It will genuinely be okay if this doesn't have a lot of people at it. It will genuinely be okay if, people have expectations after this for something and we don't do them or not, because we are not going to tell them that we're not going to set them up for this expectation. It'll genuinely be okay if we get a couple months down and we decide, you know what, we're not going to do this. We're going to postpone, or we're going to say like, we thought this was a good idea, but we need to cancel it for now. We can just do that. It's okay. And the other thing is to share, hey, when we decide to do this, this is what changes for my job. And it's helpful for people to know what I need to do. But the thing is like, if someone wants to have a job where it's the same thing week in, week out, every single day and all that, you can find those jobs. Like those jobs exist, but those are going to be management spaces, not leadership spaces. So management is good. We need that. We need consistency. And so I think for leaders like me, how do we set that environment for you all? But it helps for people to reflect that back to us and just say, hey, if this feels kind of like a lot, we just came off of this, and being able to reflect that back. Now, I'm not going to promise that all leaders are going to hear that well, but I think you don't know what you don't know. Like, I don't know what it's like to do full-time admin. However, I've done a lot of it. So I've had to do it. That's what church planters have to do. So most things that my team are doing, I understand pretty well. But there's always things I don't understand, and I always need to be cognizant of what I'm asking them to do, that they were like, I didn't really sign up for this, and you didn't really warn us about this, some of that kind of stuff. So I think the risk tolerance, and then I think some people mask their anxiety with, this is going to put too much on my plate. And I just want to say, just make sure that it's actually not, it's that like, is it really that there's going to be more on your plate? Or are you just nervous about the long things that you just shared, these questions and whatever. Because if it's just that you're anxious and that's hard and you wish it was different, then say that. Don't say, this is just going to be more work than I want to do or think our team can handle. That's not really true, because then leaders don't know whether they can trust that feedback. When they're like, wait, so in the end, it's actually just that you're anxious about what will happen. Then share that, because I would want to know that too. I'd want someone to say, hey, I feel like if we start this thing, people are going to think that we're going to do these other things, and I'm nervous about that. And then I can talk about that with them and say like, okay, and then you might be right. And then we might change our direction or our tactic or how we talk about it. But I would also say that, cultivating an environment of experimenting is super important. So people like me will say that. And that's part of the DNA of my church. And so we don't ever launch programs at Mill City Church. We've never launched a program, ever. We will do an experiment, and the experiment might be organized such that it becomes a program. But we've never said, we are now launching this thing that we've never done before, and it's going to be a program. Yeah. We're going to try everything from even like Sunday school class. Like every church is trying to stop doing adult Sunday school these days because various reasons. Well, we started it because people are like, we need to know, we need to be equipped. So we just called it Equipping Hour. And I said, all right, we're going to just try this. We're going to try this fall and see how it goes. And then if it goes well, we'll do it next spring. And then we're going to do a survey and see what everybody thinks. And honestly, you're going to vote with your feet too, because if you're not going to come an hour early, we're not going to keep doing it. So if this is something you want, like, come do it. But I was not committing to do it forever. Well, we're 3 years into that, and it's pretty organized now. And I would say it's a program. But it went well. And it was like the fourth iteration of adult education that we had tried in our little tiny 10-year-old church. Yeah. The fourth, because the other one didn't take. And so, no, and it was various reasons why. And I think in the end of the day, it had to do with timing and childcare and very practical things, and making sure that the classes felt like they hit a felt need for people. But all that to say, now I've got other problems to deal with, and then I would say that things that you can bring and others can bring is the need for, so I just said there's a need for a culture of experimenting, but there's also a need for predictable patterns. And we always talk about that. The level in which people's capacity for the uncertain can happen is, I think, directly correlated with what they can predict. Which is different than certainty, but they can predict that. It's like predicting the weather. Like, I predict that it's going to be below 32 degrees for the next 3 months in Minnesota. That's not certain, but it's pretty predictable. So like, how can you predict stuff, like have the predictable patterns in the space? So very practically, that's something that people can ask for. Like, well, can I know what to expect? Can I know? So here's a great example. If I say to these folks, hey, we need 5 people to be on this team for this event that me and my colleague want to launch. Are you willing to be on it? What we can commit to is that we're going to have an email chain, and we're going to get together every month to keep everybody, aware of what's going on. That's it. That's all I'm committing to them. But the fact that, like, okay, so there's a plan for when we're going to meet to talk about the thing that you're ambiguously asking me to participate in. And I might say something else like, you can let us know at any time if you feel like the level of which you feel like you can actually commit. So in the meeting, if we say, could you do this? You can say yes or no, or yes and. Yeah. So that's like predictable. like a predictable pattern. And when people have those predictable patterns, that can help. Also with experimenting, experiments themselves can have a predictable pattern. So the pattern is, what's the question that we have? What's the thing we're going to try? And then when exactly are we going to sit down, and how are we going to review what that happened? And so that informs the next step that we take. That's a very good pattern, and that helps people feel. So in my congregation, they know that if I say something's an experiment, there's going to be a time of thoughtfulness when a group of people or anyone can give feedback to say, how did this go? And then that's going to inform the next step. And that has really helped people who need that it's not when I say they need that, I'm like, because they're human beings, and many, many human beings, well, all human beings need to know what they can predict to some extent. And that's going to help us face uncertainty at whatever level we are created to face it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I cannot stress enough the wisdom in the experiment. And that's a practice that I had to develop for myself and for the people that I was leading, because I was leading a lot of people wired like myself. And that's, again, something really similar that we would do is say, look, this is an experiment, set an arbitrary deadline. It doesn't matter what the dedeadline is. Do it for a week, do it for 3 months, do it for a season, do it for a year, do it whatever. It doesn't matter. But setting that arbitrary deadline mentally helped me so much. Even now with this podcast, it's a brand new thing. I'm, scared out of my mind about it. But I have to say, you know what? I'm going to do it for X amount of time. And I'm going to assess, I'm going to evaluate, I'm going to review it. I'm going to say, have I hit the markers that I wanted to hit? Is this still working for me? And if so, the other thing I have to constantly remind myself is when we do an experiment, if we decide that we're not going to continue after a particular point in time, that's not failure. The other thing that I think has been so critical for me as a leader is doing that internal work of, really solidifying my identity, knowing who I am, knowing where my worth and value comes from, because the fear for a perfectionist often is the fear of failure. And when I'm not solid in my identity and knowing, whose I am and who I am, that fear of failure can be debilitating. But being able to say, even if we did this experiment for 3 months and decided not to continue it, that wasn't wasted space. That wasn't wasted time or wasted resources, because 1, we learned a lot from it. And 2, for 3 months, that impacted somebody. If I do this podcast for 1 year and then decide, you know what, not going to continue it anymore, for that year, it impacted somebody who listened to it.
Well, and it's an evergreen thing that can exist beyond its completion.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think there's just so much wisdom in the experiment mindset, and that's hugely critical. So thank you for sharing that.
Let me say one more thing about the experiment though. You do have to think about what the risk that you're taking in is. So just like really practically. So if we're going to do this event, if we find out that the place we're going to do the event that we want to do it is expensive and it relies on us getting a certain amount of people, then maybe we should think differently about that, right?
Yeah.
Or are we willing to risk that X amount of money if we don't actually end up doing the thing we're planning on? Is it worth it? That's the kind of thing that I think we really have to think about if we're going to do experiments well and not get attached to the outcomes of them.
Right.
Are we willing to see this as something we might not get the return on the investment? Because investments, that's the idea with an investment. It doesn't feel like an experiment because you're like, but I'm relying on that ROI. Well, in an experiment at the first stages, I don't think that is what you can rely on. And now with my equipping hour program at the church, I see the return on the investment. I have expectations of the return on the investment because I'm surveying people on what they're learning. And if that returns started to go down, things would have to change, or it might be the beginning of the end. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So there is to one more thing to the people like you. Yes, let's actually talk about the things that we're putting at risk here. People's time and energy and finances are the important ones. And so if we're not on board that we're going to give those things, put those things before us in case it doesn't work out. So if I put a deposit on a location for that event, how sure am I that we're going to even have it? And then what is that? Who's on the hook for that? And if I personally feel like I can, or my company can, then that's one thing. But you all need to be able to say to people like me, hey, I don't know that I feel like I signed up for risking that. So let's talk about it until we can all agree that we're putting these things out there as a volatile risk when it's not a proven investment.
Yeah, that's good. That's so good. So much wisdom. And you talk about this experiment mindset, which that's one of the other things that I wanted to talk with you about today. In order to really operate and lead the way that you do, is being willing to ask questions, being a question asker. And so I wanted to talk about your book a little bit, because that's really, the premise of everything. For those that aren't watching right now, who are only listening, you're missing this beautiful book cover, but my little Vanna White impersonation right here. I've got my copy of it. We also gave away a couple signed copies in our leadership Christmas prize pack giveaway. So we have some very, very happy people who have the book in their hands. But it's titled Stay Curious, How Questions and Doubts Can Save Your Faith. And I think what I love the most about that, I preached a sermon recently about the very idea of doubt. And so often, we think that doubt and faith are mutually exclusive. And I just don't believe that that's true. And so I love what you wrote about. I've read it and I've recommended it to so many different people, because I think this is, if there was kind of one common experience that pretty much any human is going to have, is in coming to the point where we are questioning things and we're starting to wonder about and establish our own belief system. I was just talking to my kids about this the other day. We were having this whole conversation about our faith during our morning devotions, and they were asking about just some people not believe in God. And I said, yeah, absolutely. People believe lots of different things. And I said, one day you might question your own belief in God. Of course they're young, they're 9 and 7 and 3. And so they're like, wait, what, why would we do that? I said, well, because you believe what you believe right now, because mommy and daddy are teaching you these things, because it's what we believe and what we value. But at some point in life, you're going to start thinking for yourself, and you're going to have to question things, and you're going to have to wrestle with that. And you're going to have to decide on your own, what you believe and what does that mean for you in your life. And so it was funny to me, because after having read your book, I was just thinking about how even as adults, it was confusing to my kids. Like, why would I question that? But even as adults, we still feel like, wait, no, why would I question? Can I even question? Can I doubt? And so I would just love for you to talk a little bit about, why did you write this? What does that journey look like for you? What questions and doubts did you wrestle with? And why was it so important for these to be the words that you shared with the world?
Yeah. Well, the answer to that question of why it's so important is the conversation that you just had with your kids. Like, I serve people just like you and many other people who are trying to be good parents of adults. And, how do we create a space where this is given, like a space where questions can be asked in a way that allows people to wrestle so that they can grow. I'm just absolutely convinced that a faith that doesn't have the wrestling is not one that's going to grow in its capacity. I'm an athlete, and it's so funny to me how often I forget that but it comes back to me all the time. Like, our bodies are just like our spiritual and emotional lives. Like, there is nothing that makes your body get stronger except for pressure. There's nothing that's going to make you run faster than pushing yourself to the limits you had before. And so if you don't ask questions that push you to expand, or questions are generative, so they develop more questions and deeper questions, you won't get there. Now, asking really good questions inevitably leads to big things that would maybe be under the header of doubt, doubting what you've been told before, about anything. And so the fear that people have of doubt, and the way that can lead to a squelching of questions, has some pretty significant disastrous results, in my opinion. I mean, people can talk a lot, and we all are, about what in the US we are starting to call the nuns and the duns, people who say they're none on the, religious affiliation, or they're done with Christianity. There's lots of complex reasons for that. And of course, I'm interested in that as a millennial. However, I would say that one of the things that is consistently underrepresented is how people didn't leave because they decided they didn't believe in God. At first, at least, I think they left because there wasn't room for their questions. I think that is a big reason. And so whether or not everyone can articulate that, or that's exactly what they're studying, but in the research that I did for this book, one of the most compelling things that I read was that most people who go through a time of questions and doubts come back to a faith that they would describe as the same as before, or deeper and more meaningful and more vibrant. Now, the other thing that was really compelling in that same study was how vast majority of people feel words like afraid or unwilling to share with people in their faith community that they have these questions or doubts. So to me, you put that together and it's like, well, so then with the people who don't necessarily have all the answers, but should create safe space for the questions, you see, so then it just adds up. So if you don't feel that, if the questions are important and they lead to people who end up coming on the other side with a more meaningful faith, but most people don't feel that the environment that they're in has room for that, then you'd leave that environment so there's room for those questions so that you can get. So that just actually makes sense. And I don't want people to leave that environment, not because of, I don't want people to leave Mill City Church. I mean, sure, I feel sad if somebody decides they don't want to participate in organized religion anymore and they leave my church, which does happen actually a lot. It's probably the number one reason people might leave. And, it's easy for me to be like, oh no, and I take it personally and think about it. But there's a long line history for all these folks as to what the quote unquote the church has meant to them and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So my number one goal is not that people stay in church, but that they find the space that has room for those questions, because my deepest hope for everybody is that they have a more vibrant, meaningful faith. And I'm sad, genuinely, personally, when someone's quest leads them to decide that they're not Christian or that they don't believe in God. That makes me sad. But I'm not afraid of that, because I know that the same questions that lead some people to that are the ones that are going to lead to most people having a more vibrant and maybe a shift in their understanding of God, but not a complete disengagement from it. It's the people who run from the questions, ignore the questions, fade out of the spaces where they feel like there's no room for their questions, and then don't really bring the questions anywhere else. Those are the people I'm actually the most concerned about. Because this is the most important question you can ask in your entire life, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Who is God? Who is Jesus? And what does that mean? And there's a lot of answers to that, and I'll respect any answer that people have. I'll probably disagree, but I don't know 100% for certain. It's faith and maybe assurance I might be able to have, but not certainty. That's what faith is, like you were saying. So I just feel like, I'm most concerned about the people that are fading out. If someone says I'm a nun or I'm a done because I decided I'm not religious and I'm done with faith, and I decided that, and here's why, and here's what I did with those questions, I'm going to respect that person and love that person. But I genuinely have a hard time sitting with someone who's like, I guess I stopped going or stopped doing this or stopped believing. I'm like, indecision's still a decision. I just think for something that's this important, like make a decision, get yourself in a process, do some experiments, which is what I outline in the book, some experiments. And I am happy to stay in a relationship with someone who decides they're an atheist. I have lots of friends who are atheists, friends who are people of faith in other religions. I don't think it's a prerequisite to be friends with people that they agree with you. However, if something's meaningful to you, like your faith, like mine is in Jesus, then I want to share it. And so to me, that's what's the purpose of sharing it. But the thing I'm going to be like a evangelist for is not just running away from the question, altogether. It was so important. And even if you decide it's not for you, distinctly decide that that's the most important question you're deciding, because it will change the trajectory of your entire life. And then there's other big questions like, if you're going to spend your life with somebody and marry them, or if you decide to produce other human beings and other things like that. But I still think the most important question is what you're going to do about God.
Yeah.
So
and
don't run from it.
What are some of because I feel like, and that is kind of the overarching, like, what am I going to do about God? But for those who have wrestled and struggled with their faith, I feel like we can think, okay, well, some questions are okay, but not the questions that I have, not the struggles that I have. So what are some of the common, just give some examples, and we don't have the answers, obviously, but what are some of the questions, just to give examples that you feel like it's okay to ask this? It's okay to wrestle with this and to wonder and to question and to doubt.
Well, I personally think that there are no questions that are off limits. I think Jesus can handle your questions. Every single question that you have about him, about the world, about yourself, about anything. And the hard reality for all of us to face is that if you can trust, that's the word I'll use, trust, not necessarily just believe, but trust that Jesus can handle your questions. The hard reality is that a lot of people can't.
Yeah.
Questions bring up anxiety. They bring up concern and worry, and a lot of other, sometimes anger, sometimes sadness. Mm-hmm. Jesus can handle your anxiety. Jesus isn't anxious about your anxiety. Jesus isn't sad about your, like, is going to like crumble underneath the weight of your sadness. He can just actually physically, emotionally, spiritually be in that with you. We saw him physically do that in the story of his life on earth. So in your sadness, Jesus is present with you tangibly, I think. And I know that's not everyone's experience. That's not how they feel. But to me, that's why the story of who Jesus is and who I experience Jesus to be is a being that can handle every single question that you might have. But the truth is, some people in your life, there's no person in your life that can handle them all. And so you have to be wise about that. And I'm not advocating for churches to say, we must be a place where everyone can ask any question out loud, because some of those questions would be really hurtful to other people.
Yeah.
Right? If somebody comes to me one-on-one and says, I have a question, can we talk about it one-on-one? And they say, this happened to me maybe a few months ago. A gentleman came up and said, I want to talk about the phrase white privilege, because as a white man, I just feel like upset about this. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I just feel overwhelmed. And can you talk to me about it? What is it? Is it real? Does it matter? Those are some big questions, And if he asks that question with me, I can handle that. We can talk about it. And we had a great conversation. And I think we came out with mutual understanding of the other. Would that be an appropriate question for him to ask with his hand raised in front of my church membership, of which many people of color are participating? No, that would not be appropriate, but it doesn't mean his question isn't valid or doesn't matter. In fact, if he wouldn't have asked it in the right place, he wouldn't have come to the next step that he's in. And I wouldn't have gotten to learn from someone who was unsure of what I meant when I was talking about that. Right. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that every question is appropriate for every space. It definitely means that, I think it definitely puts us more towards this. Like, this is why we need a God that can handle this. And I think we're fortunate to see that God gave us enough of God's story that God can handle it. So that's the tricky part, right? So you can say, like, is God real? That's a big question. Can you say, like, is God gonna send people to hell? You can ask questions about one of the big hangups for me was, why did I watch like some really powerful Christian people like Billy Graham come walking into my dad's hospital room and lay hands on him and do everything the Bible says, and then he still died 2 weeks later? Like, why does that happen? I don't know. That's the kind of stuff that I think you got to think about where to ask those. But I just don't think any of them are off limits. I don't think questions around any of the topics that are the most hot topics of the day are off limits. Whether it's about some of the hot topics in the United States right now around value of life and what forms of life and all that kind of stuff, and questions around sexuality. I just don't think any of the questions are off limits. And if people are going to say they are because the Bible says, I'm like, the Bible itself condones an invitation to ask questions, in my opinion. So doesn't mean that there's not things we can take as a truth operative, like we're going to operate out of this truth that we feel assured about, which is different than certain. And I do believe truth is real. I just think for little finite humans to think that we can have all of it is a little silly and arrogant. And so what does it mean to try to operate out of a sense of truth and assurance without having the arrogance of rightness? That's just not getting us anywhere.
Yeah. One of the things that you talked about a lot in the book, because you give a lot of practical advice and a lot of, hey, here's what you can do with this. One of the things that you talk about a lot is a conversation partner. And one of the thoughts that I had is how would you advise people to go about, what kind of wisdom would you use to find a good conversation partner? Because one thing that the conversation that I feel like I've had a lot with people over and over is, I had no one. I didn't have anyone that I could trust, that I could talk to. I was isolated in this experience. I wasn't quite sure who to turn to. So for someone who wants to ask and wrestle with those questions and they're looking for a safe space, what would you recommend to them?
Well, very practically, I think for some people, they might need like a spiritual director or someone like a coach, because those spaces have a different type of safety to them, because they're not usually going to be a long-term relationship, or if they are, they're confined to that space. So like I've been in relationship with my spiritual director for 11 years, but I am with her in that space pretty much primarily. And that's distinct. I think sometimes it's a therapist, if the questions are around your family systems and some pretty crazy stuff, and why does this person make me feel insane? That's the conversation partner. But I think there are people in most people's life that they can share that with. I just find that we're losing our ability to figure out how to tap into appropriate vulnerability. And that's why everyone likes Brene Brown so much, you know?
Yeah.
But I'll sit with these like grown women and be like, listen, like where did this relationship go with this woman? Like, you guys have been really close. What happened? Well, I don't know. She stopped calling me. And so then, and then I talked to the other person because I'm like, I'm just not here for that. And then she's like, I don't know. She stopped calling me. So I think she probably doesn't. And I'm like, this is so silly. Like, you guys, like, you know, unless somebody's lying to me about what happened and I don't, you know, if I'm close with them, they're not. I'm like, then someone get the courage to just ask what happened. Worst case scenario, they tell you, I did want to cease our relationship and here's why. And then you can move forward and start healing instead of this ambiguous thing. I think that kind of little micro example that I just gave is way more prevalent than actually not having people that you can talk to.
Yeah.
To be honest. And I also think, I mean, and I understand someone's going like, you don't understand. I live in this rural part of wherever. And yeah, also it's 2019 or maybe people listening to this now, it's 2020. You can connect with people all over the place. There are so many like there opportunities for having conversations that maybe would be a little safer to start in a room of, you know, an online group where people are asking questions around the topic that you're interested in or wondering about. Take everything with a grain of salt. Everybody else is just another human being. They're another finite human being who for sure is not totally right, because there's no such thing as a human being that has it all right. So enter into that. But I think that people need to learn how to have, so I don't know if you have heard this term, but when I was growing up in Bible college and stuff, they called it a DTR, or a define the relationship talk. So you'd have like a DTR to decide like, so what are we doing here, person at Bible college with me? And that's really cute that we have that romantically. But why are we not having that ton of intentionality around like soul friendships? Hello. Yeah. And just talk to people. Like, people are like, I prayed for my spouse all this time. Sure. I mean, kind of important. That person's going to be pretty critical. But what's the ramifications of the fact that nobody's been praying about their friendships for this long and writing down journals about what they'd hope for in like a group of friends who can like covenant to support each other? So I'm just like, you know, if you don't have that, who's going to do that if it's not you? I've said that to so many people. I've just said, well, if you're not going to start that or encourage that or start that conversation, why do you think anyone else will? And so I know it's risky. I know it's vulnerable. I think of it as like Jenga. So if you're playing Jenga and you like tap the bricks and you're tapping them to see which one moves a little bit, you know, think of it like that. Like, you got a Jenga tower of relationships. Maybe it's not very high. Some people don't have as many as people like me, maybe because I'm extroverted, but tap them around the subject. And if it seems like there's some like, ooh, I'm interested in that, and like pushing it and see if it, and you might be like, okay. And out pops the other side, like a conversation partner that you can actually do some stuff with. Doesn't mean they need to agree with you or be on the same page, but are they the same level of risk tolerance to have a conversation that feels like it could be, and you know what brings two people together? Things like, I don't feel like we could have this conversation with everyone. Like,
right.
Yeah, totally. That's okay.
And so what about for the person that wants to be a safe space? For the leader who says, I really want to be available, you know, as a safe space for people, which obviously means that we first have to deal with our own questions. We have to learn how to ask and how to wrestle. And it doesn't mean that we're going to exhaust our list of questions before we can be a safe space, but we have to engage with that process. So for the person listening that says, oh my gosh, you know, I know there are people who have questions and doubts, and I don't want to be someone that draws a hard and fast line. I want to be someone that is able to be a safe space. What does it take? What do we have to intentionally engage with in order to grow ourselves, to really have the capacity to be a safe space and to be able to have these conversations and allow people to ask questions? How do we as leaders grow into that?
Yeah, I mean, it starts and ends with emotional intelligence. So if you look even like emotional intelligence theory 101, you have got to start with self-awareness. Do not walk into a room and go, I wonder what everyone else in here is feeling and how I can understand their emotions and how I can manage this room. You better start with myself. How do I feel? What emotions are coming up in me? What thoughts do I have? How am I in this space? And then you can manage yourself. So step 1, self-awareness. Step 2, self-management. Then you can start saying like, okay, now these other people or this environment or this team or how we're existing together. And then how can I manage that? And so if I say, like I kind of boldly did by writing this book, I can handle like the questions that you have and I want to be someone who can. I have to acknowledge that that doesn't mean I'm not going to be anxious, and I'm going to have to check my anxiety, and maybe at some point say, I want to listen to you, but this is anxious for me for some reasons, and so I can't do this, and can I help you find someone else? But for the most part, I think I can do that, but I have to check my own anxiety. Like, what am I anxious about when I go into that conversation? When I sit with a young couple like I did last week, and they just were like, we have to leave organized religion, and I'm like, why? And they're telling me, and I have to think about like what that's making me feel. Like, it's making me feel, do I feel anxious for them? What am I anxious about then? And do I feel sad? Yeah, okay, I feel sad. Like, I don't want them to leave. And do I feel angry because I feel like they betrayed me in some way? So what's that about? Like, is that there? Oh no, it's not. It's just that, that's what I need to be feeling, because to actually be quote unquote safe, I think that's what you have to be. Mm-hmm. I'd also encourage any leader. I mean, I think we need to figure out how to express it, like verbally, that we are wanting to be that kind of space, but to do that with humility and say, like, I want to do this, I want to try. But then I also think we need to be careful I would never suggest that any space that I lead is safe.
Yeah.
There is no such thing. I cannot, because if I'm leading it, that means there's other people there. And if there's other people there, then it's not safe. So I have said things like, I think I would like Mill City Church to be a brave space where everybody comes with courage and knows that we might hurt each other, and we might need to Matthew 18 that and confront it. And maybe that you might, out of being brave, like, it's not maybe a space for you to stay in, and different communities right for you. I don't know. But I can't promise you that it's safe. I can tell you that I will try to be safe as a person. So if that gentleman who wanted to talk about white privilege, can I try to be a safe person for him? Doesn't mean I'm going to tell him everything he wants to hear, but can I be safe and try to treat him as a human and keep him his best interest in mind and ask him good questions? Yeah, but I cannot promise that if there was even one more person sitting at this table.
Yeah.
So it is inappropriate to do that. And so as I know that there's a tendency for us who lead churches or nonprofits or any other space of faith to try to push that and say that, because people have felt so unsafe in other spaces like this. But I think we're in danger of creating a double trauma if we try to promise that a space is safe.
Yeah.
Like that I have no illusions that I can control over human beings. It's dangerous to say. I could say I want Mill City to be a safe place, right, and I want it to be a brave space, but boy, that's an idealistic hope that I think at moments is true.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it, but it all begins and ends with your own emotional intelligence and knowing when you need to tap out and knowing when you need to tap into the reserves of peace and shalom, because, at the end of the day, like that couple I was talking to, I'm not anxious. Like, they're on their journey. I know about this. I know how it goes. It's not up to me what happens. And so I asked them some good questions and I encouraged them and I said, can I challenge you a little bit? And they said yes. And that was good, but if I would have gone in there all wound up because I don't know what I need, like their tithe or something, whatever you think's at stake there. But I was like, this is not at stake. There is not anything at stake that's more significant in their own faith journey right now.
Yeah.
And what they think they need to do and the agency that they're trying to have to do it.
That's good. That's good. Gosh, we could talk about this stuff all day because it's so critical right now. The one last thing, if I can ask you one more question that I want to ask you to speak to, because, we've talked a lot about the questions and all of that. But there's this process that you talk about, the deconstructing and reconstructing. And I think understanding that, with all of the questions and all of the doubts and all of the curiosity and with all of the deconstructing, there does come this point of reconstruction. And the example that you used in the book that I loved was the Legos. You talked about the Lego board and the bricks with the students at the college where you teach and at the university. And so talk a little bit about that. Use with that Lego example, this process of deconstructing and reconstructing, and the hope that there is on the other side of being brave enough to ask and wrestle with the questions.
Yes. Yeah. So I love Legos personally. So they're just fun. But I just think so the illustration that I use is like your life when you're growing up, similar to the fact that you play Legos when you're a kid. It's like your life is one of those green Lego boards. And this is an illustration that can break down, but just go with it. Like your life's like a Lego board and people are putting pieces on that green thing. And the idea is that you're going to emerge as an 18-year-old adult into the world of wherever you do after after high school or as you step into the workforce or college, and you've got this worldview that you've now built out of these bricks that's kind of like supposed to be a quote unquote foundation for whatever you're going to learn and grow and do. And what happened was, it's like, I'll even have people do this. I'll have them like blindfolded and build their Lego tower in like 2 minutes with just their non-dominant hand. And I'm like, building your worldview from 0 to 18 is kind of like building a Lego tower blindfolded with your non-dominant hand, like quickly. And so you shouldn't expect to come popping out as an 18-year-old with a worldview that can really hold everything up. I just think that's normal. And so the process of taking some of those bricks off and going, wait, who even put this one here? Did I put this here? Maybe someone else did. And even if they did, is it supposed to be there, or does it help me? And instead of just like out of frustration, like pushing the whole thing off the table, saying like, okay, as painful as it is, because I've maybe gotten a little attached to some of these bricks and how they've looked and how this is, I now see that this is not a very sturdy foundation, and I need to take some of these bricks off, probably not all of them, but get down to the studs and go, okay, these are like 3 bricks that can be on here, or maybe for a season they all feel like they're gone. I think that's real. People feel that way. And then I need to say, okay, I can be someone who says that was annoying and frustrating and hurtful, and now I'm just going to start to press on, and I don't want to deal with this. You can choose that if you want, or you can say, I want to intentionally reconstruct this thing, this time with a lot more agency and invitation to people that I'm choosing into that, and not allowing them to make the decision what goes on or off, but letting them influence it. And most importantly, like trying to have a conscious dependence on the Holy Spirit to help me do that. And you might have to wrestle with the little brick of the Holy Spirit first. I get that. But once you get there, how do you do that? Now, the other option seems like a realistic one, but it's actually not real. There is no such thing as pushing the Lego board off the table and onto the ground. It will start getting rebuilt again, as though you are left-handed or with your non-dominant hand and blindfolded. If you don't, it's like indecision is still a decision. So it will start to get rebuilt by your environment and what you're doing and your quote unquote God concept and all that stuff. It isn't neutral. It'll start to get rebuilt again. So the decision that people actually have to make is, am I willing to be thoughtful about how I take this thing apart? And then am I willing to be thoughtful about how I put it back together? It's not really an option to not take it apart at all, because either it'll like, something will break. And also it's not an option to say, I'm not going to try to put this thing back together. It'll get itself put back together. And that's going to put you in a cycle of like having a really unsturdy situation that's going to not hold up a lot of the realities of life and what we go through.
Yeah.
So that's how it goes. I talk about it with my college students when I worked in student development, and then I'd slip them a little, $4 Lego set in their post office box.
I love it. I love it. There's so much hope in the reconstruction process. Well, I just want to say thank you. I know that so much of what you've said has been super critical today. And I want to encourage everybody to go grab their own copy of Stay Curious, obviously. They can find that wherever books are sold. And then tell us real quick about the podcast. Where can they find the Stay Curious podcast?
Yeah, so if you go to staycuriousmedia.com, you can get to it. Anywhere you get podcasts, you can find this, just put in Stay Curious Podcast. And then all the podcasts that we have under the Lead Stories Media banner is at leadstoriesmedia.com, and you'll see the podcast there. That's where you can connect with it. And on Lead Stories, or on staycuriousmedia.com, there's a little bit more information and stuff about the book too, so you can read more about it. And then my kind of main hub is pastorsteph.com, where you can go from that to all the things. And then I'm Pastor Steph on all the things as well.
Awesome. And we'll have all that in the show notes. We'll put all the links to you and your social media and Lead Stories and Stay Curious and all the different things that you're a part of will be in the show notes. So I just want to encourage everybody to check that out, especially those of us, which should be all of us, that are in the process of wandering and wondering and questioning and wrestling, because that's actually a really, really good place to be and a healthy place to be. So Steph, thank you so much for your time and for being here today and for sharing with us. And we just appreciate it so much.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for listening to the Table Leadership Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the resources that were discussed at the table today and to connect with today's guest. Remember to subscribe to the Table Podcast and follow along on social media at The Table Leadership. Visit thetableleadership.com to learn more about current courses and coaching opportunities. And finally, you can connect with me, your host, at CyonEdgerton.com or on social media at CyonEdgerton. I look forward to the next time that you pull up a seat at the table.